Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today to Conducting Assessment with Avenue Tools and Resources Part 2, Speaking and Writing, presented by Margaret Stashek. We're very lucky to have you here again, Margaret, and thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for the session last week. I'm sure a few people here were at that session, so we look forward to what you have to say today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for attending on such a messy day in terms of the weather. And I hope that more people will be joining during this webinar. So as Paul said, today's webinar is about conducting assessment with Avenue Tools and Resources, specifically productive skills, speaking and writing. And it is the second webinar in the series on conducting assessment. Last week, we had a webinar about conducting assessment of listening and reading, and you can watch the recorded webinar by accessing the link on the Avenue forum. And if you have any questions or any comments, or you would like to contribute to the topic of both webinars, please feel free to add your comments and remarks on the forum. It would be great to engage everybody in that discussion, and there's no question that is not important enough to be answered. And you can also share your ideas. How do you do things in your classroom? What things you practice and what works for you and what doesn't. It's always great to hear that from your colleagues and to know what is practical for them. Okay, so let's get started. Let me just go here. Here's our land acknowledgement. And I'm just going to go to the beginning of our session. So in this presentation today, I'm going to talk about the tools that are used commonly by many instructors that are used for assessing speaking and writing, primarily forum, quiz, and assignment, which are all part of Avenue and Moodle environment. I'm going to take a look at a few ready-made speaking and writing assessments that appear in different units and modules in Course Builder. And this is something to demonstrate what is available out there, which you can use. And also, we're going to look at them from the perspective of the instructor who wants to create their own assessment tasks and what are the best features of each of those tools that you can use when you develop your own tasks. And I'm going to spend some time on talking about administering speaking and writing assessments online, because this is something that is quite challenging and difficult depending on the CLB level. With different, with the nature of online environment, there are different issues that come up, and we're going just to talk about that. And finally, just a few brief tips on planning and developing your own speaking and writing assessments, what things you may need to consider when you start developing them, and what works, what doesn't work. Okay, let's move on. So first, I'm going to start with the question for you. So let's hear if you assess speaking online and if you assess writing online. And regardless whether you say yes or no, could you please explain your answer if you wish to, using the chat. So you can use our chat and just say, if you assess speaking online, what do you use or how you do it, briefly. And if you don't, you could do the same thing. Okay, so I can see that it's all 50-50. It's really an even spread. Oh yeah, we have more people who assess writing online now, which is great. And speaking too, that's great. Okay. And let's look at the possible answers. Okay, Paul, could I ask you to read out a few answers from the chat, if there are
Yes,
any?
definitely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lana says she uses the assignment and quiz online,
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming. And honestly, it hasn't occurred to me. Don't really have any tech knowledge. I'm not sure who that was, but thanks for sharing that. I use assignment and rubrics for speaking. Again, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
online from Valerie. And Elizabeth
Mm-hmm.
says, yes, I use mostly assignment and or quiz. I use quiz for writing because I teach lower levels.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's excellent. So this is what I'm going to speak about primarily. I'm going to talk about the assignment and the quiz as they can be used for assessment purposes. Okay, so let's move on. Um, okay, so I'm just going to take a look at a very typical unit that appears in Course Builder and just look at it from the perspective of the possible assessment tools, something that you can use that can be uploaded to learners' ePortfolio. And when I say assessment, I don't necessarily mean the assessment task itself. I also mean any other tools that are used, such as rubrics or task descriptions or anything else that goes with that, such as PDF files. And also, I mean skill using tasks, basically anything that can be treated as a sample language that can represent learners' proficiency and can be used for overall assessment purposes. So let's take a look at one of the examples of the units that we have in here. And I'm just going to take a look at the unit called Making Requests at Work. So in this unit in here, as you can see, like in any typical unit, there's a section for instructors right here with some PDF files. And then there's a section for learners. In the learners section, you can see there are little symbols in here with that hand. These are these are the assignment tasks that are included in that unit, and there are 3 of them. So there's a speaking practice task, there's another speaking practice task, and then there's a writing assessment task. So if you would like to differentiate between the assessment task and the skill using task, you can do that. And this is what happened in this unit. There's enough writing done before the assessment task in H5P activities. So therefore, there's no practice task in here, also called skill using. But so the learners are ready to do the assessment task. As you can see, there are also hard copies of these files in here. So these are PDF files that you can use. And let me just show you one of those. It's just a ready to use tool that can be used in the face-to-face classroom, in the face-to-face class, or it can be just printed out and used by the instructor in any other way that they deem to use it. So as you can see, it has the space for the learner to write, so they can write in here, and it has the same criteria and the same setup of the task that appears online. Okay, let's go back here. So this is a typical unit that would have uh, any items related to assessment. Some units have 1 or 2 assessment tasks. Some units would have only 1. There are units that are divided into smaller sections, and then each section has its own assessment artifact. It really varies from one unit to another. So there's no one specific number of assessment artifacts that you can see in units, but you get an idea that you can use quite a lot of tools that are available in here. Okay, let's move. So as we could see in the unit, there are many tools that are actually used by instructors for assessment purposes. And I'm going to talk about all 4 of them. So the first one is a forum. A forum is a very useful activity that is part of the Moodle tools. So it is part of Avenue. And a forum activity is a great source. It's a great opportunity for a learner to demonstrate their speaking on writing, so both productive skills. And I know that some instructors actually use forum activities for assessment purposes, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit about, advantages and disadvantages of doing that. Then I'm going to move on and talk about quiz. I talked about quiz last week when I was talking about assessing listening and reading, and quiz is an ideal tool for assessment of receptive skills, but it can be used for assessment of productive skills, especially with lower CLB levels, or in case when we need the task that requires a prompt. And I'm going to demonstrate a few examples how it can be done. And the third tool that is probably the most typical tool used for the assessment of productive skills is assignment. And again, assignment is a tool that's been designed for assessment of writing or speaking. So it comes with a rubric and the typical settings of the assessment task. And I'm going to show a few examples how it can be used and how the specific information needs to be included in there. And finally, PDF files. So we took a quick look at one of the examples, but I'm going to show a few more. I also wanted to say that we're going to look at PDF files because depending on the type of task, the online tools available on Avenue may not lend themselves to that task. And what I mean here is sometimes the assessment tasks that are used for speaking involve two learners or two people. It would be, and the learner, only one learner is assessed, but the other learner or an instructor plays the role of the support. So provides prompts. For example, in a role play, they would provide one side of the conversation, and then the assessed learner would respond to their questions or to their comments. Online environment and online tools that are listed in here, they do not really provide an opportunity for that. So there's really, it's just one person completing that assignment or forum or quiz. However, there are ways in which you can change or adapt these tools so they can accommodate that another person that would participate in the assessment task. And I'm going to show that as well, one of the examples. Okay. So let's start with the forum. So as I said, some instructors use forum for assessment purposes. And I'm feeling a little bit, I don't know, I'm not convinced about it that it's the best assessment tool. Forum, it creates great opportunity for learners to speak or to write and share their speaking and writing with the rest of the class. However, it is not designed for assessment purposes. I mean, a forum can be used as a submission, and it can be part of ePortfolio, learner's ePortfolio. It has the space, and I'm going to show you in a moment, to display assessment criteria or activity requirements or conditions that you can set. However, it doesn't have any form of grading or feedback tool. The only way you can provide feedback to the learners, to the learner in reaction to their writing or speaking, is using the private reply. And the private reply feature is great. There's just one disadvantage. It does not show in ePortfolio yet. We haven't figured it out yet how it could be done. So I think it's just very difficult for the instructor to provide feedback in such a way that would be efficient and it would be displayed in ePortfolio. However, if you choose, you can use Forum for skill building or skill using tasks and activities. I would then consider tagging it as other. I wouldn't tag Forum activity and Forum artifact as one of the skill ones because it's not going to come with the rubric or with the scoring tool, and it's going to be difficult to look at it comparing it to other artifacts. However, if you have a series of speaking or writing artifacts available and you still need more language samples from the learner to be able to make the decision about their assessment, this is where the forum samples would come in handy, and they would be just very good to take a better look at learners' proficiency. And forum is excellent for practice activities, but not necessarily tasks, as I said. Let's take a look at the example. Okay. So I put a few examples in here. Just I compiled a list of sample speaking and writing assessment from different units just to demonstrate them during this webinar. So the first one that is in here is the forum for a CLB 1-2 class. And in this forum, it's just a very simple question. That forum comes from the unit called Shopping for School. And the forum just includes one question: what do you need for school? There is an audio version of that question in here, so the learner can play it. And then that recording includes all of this that is in the instructions for the learner. So what do you need for your English course? And then what do you already have? The learner needs to write 2 to 3 sentences. There's an example because it is CLB 1-2, and it is a skill using task. And then a brief description of how to respond to that unit. So it directs the learner to click reply and then post their reply. And you will see that it allows the learner to just post their written response that is visible to everybody in class. So that's another thing that may not be necessarily something desired in the assessment task. But as a skill using or even skill building task, this is excellent. This is a very good tool to use. Let's go back to the to another one that I wanted to show. It's a speaking practice this time for about Canadian coins. Comes from the unit called Canadian Money, and again it's for CLB 1-2 proficiency level. And it has a very brief question: do you have cash at home? What Canadian coins do you have? Put the coins on the table and say name each coin and say how much money it is. So, and there's an example in here, and we ask the learner to record the sentences. So this is again something that they would do in here, and we can collect the responses. They will be, if the forum is tagged for ePortfolio, the responses will be auto-collected, but as I said before, there's no room for the instructor to provide feedback or any kind of scoring that would be available. Okay, let's look at the next tool, and that would be Quiz. So Quiz is another tool that is part of Avenue offering, Moodle offering. And it's a tool that works really well for assessing receptive skills such as listening or reading, but it can also be used for speaking and writing practice or skill using tasks, especially at lower levels. It works really well for stage 1 CLB levels, especially in tasks that require inserting a prompt, either an audio prompt, an image, or a text. And I'm going to show you an example in a moment, which the learner responds to. Quiz has all the possible settings that are needed for assessment tasks. So you can set time limit, the number of attempts, the number of submissions. You can set the score, the grade. However, there's no rubric. So any kind of assessment criteria needs to be displayed in the description of the task and later in the grader information. I'm going to show how that works. So you can have a quick access to that. And also the learner, when they perform the task, they can see the assessment criteria together with their recording tool or their online text tool. Quiz is also good for adding a self-assessment tool. For example, for stage 2 CLB levels, you could include an open-ended question, an essay type of question in Quiz, and have that a different type of scoring, so it would not interfere with the scoring for the assessment questions, but it would just pose the question to learners, how much have you learned from doing this task, from performing the task? What worked for you? What do you think you still need to work on, and so on? And then you don't need to set the score for that question at the same level as the other questions. Let's look at an example of a few quiz assessment tasks. So it will be easier for you to understand what I'm talking about when I mean prompts. So the first quiz that I'm going to demonstrate is CLB-1-2 speaking practice task or skill using task that comes from the unit called Telling Time, and it's talk about time and your routines. I'm just going to go there. And in here, you can see that all the information is included in the description. So we have here the CLB information, the instruction, as well as some conditions of that task, like there are 7 questions, say and record your response, then possible criteria, what each response should include. So it's about telling time, using the preposition correctly, using a complete sentence, speaking clearly. There's time limit, 30 minutes, which is that function of setting time limit is available in quiz. It is not available in assignment. So it is good to use it if this is something you would like to include in your task. And also other conditions, you can record your responses multiple times, but you can submit them only once. So you just let the learner know that they can make only one submission, and that the task goes to your ePortfolio directly, and then the score. A quick description on how to do that. But I assume that when we conduct assessment, we prepare our learners for doing that. So this is just a refresher. We're going to talk about it when I move on to conducting assessment in different modalities. Let's take a look at the quiz. So as you can see, in this quiz has 7 questions. Each question is set up on a separate page. In here, we have the question in its written form. The learner can also play the audio of that question, and then they would click record their answer, play. If they're happy with this, they can upload. If they're not happy, they can re-record again and then upload. And then the next page is set up. I'm sorry, my Google is not, I didn't give it permission to use the microphone. So the second question is set up the same way. What time do you usually go to bed? And again, it's the same process that the learner goes through. So it's pretty straightforward. It's very easy for the learner to understand what is happening in this assessment task, and they can move from one question to another. And you can see that everything is, their progression is displayed here. They can go back to the previous page and fix it if they want to. Let's take a look at another sample, a writing task, again for CLB-2. And as you can see, these are lower CLB levels because this is where the learner needs support in terms of the prompt and more of the limited choices in their answers. So let's go to this one. So this one, for a change, is a writing practice task. And it's about writing an address, copying actually the information into the form. Again, we have the CLB information here, that checklist, because this is just a skill using task. So this is what the learner needs to include in their response. So we're paying attention to writing the correct information, the spelling, using capital letters, using spacing, and the time limit, the score. And then in the questions, you'll see the questions are set up in a slightly different way. So in here, there is the information about Gina's address. There are the sentences that the learner needs to read. And all they need to do is in here, they copy information from this part in here. So this is the short answer type of question from quiz. And if you actually look at the question in here what you can do. I'm going to go to the question here. What you could, if you were setting it up, you would just have to use the brackets, the square brackets, to include the information. So it's exactly, so the learner copies it exactly in such a way that is required by the task. Okay. And I'm going to show you one more example of the quiz, which is a speaking practice task or skill using tasks for CLB 3-4. This one is a little bit higher. And again, similarly to the other tasks, it requires a prompt. So this one is about reading information included on the pay stub and actually saying that information out loud. So what they're doing, they're getting the specific details from the pay stub and saying it out loud. So it's not necessarily an assessment task per se, but it's something that allows them to practice the skill that is needed maybe for a bigger task, for the assessment task. And in the instructions, we tell them what kind of sentences they're expected to record. And that type of activity has been practiced already in H5P format, so the learners are familiar with that. It's not the first time they see that type of text, as you will see, and it is right in here. So this is the pay stub that's been inserted into the question with all kinds of numerical information. And what the learner is expected to do is to record their sentences. And again, they can record, play if they're not happy with it, and then upload. The expectation is that they record all those sentences together. What you could also do in here, you could circle the amounts that you would like them to read. So you could, for example, circle this and then the rate. So the learner would have to say the hourly rate is $26.25, or the deductions, the current deductions are $281, and so on and so on. So this is what you could do. But at this moment, the learner just can choose the information that they want to make their sentences about and just record them. Okay. So let's take a look at the last tool that is part of the Avenue offering, is the assignment. So assignment is actually the tool that was designed for testing speaking or writing. And it's really very good for both skill using and assessment tasks. Assignment allows the learner to either enter their audio to audio or text files directly within assignment, because assignment has these built-in online text and Poodle recording, or they can upload external files. I think for the sake of our learners, the learners in our classes who very often have limited digital resources, I think it would be better not to avoid actually uploading external files and stick to using the online and online text and Poodle recording that is part of the assignment. It's just easier. It's also easier for marking and grading the assignment. Assignment comes with a built-in rubric and the text box, specific designated text box for feedback. So you can provide it just allows you to streamline the process of grading. Basically, when the assignment has many submissions made by learners by the deadline, what you can do is just start with the first submission, go through the rubric, provide your action-oriented feedback in the text box, and then click on next submission and go to the next submission. So it goes really, really fast. And I would do that. I would basically set out the deadline for the submission and provide and mark and provide feedback past the deadline. So I wouldn't just go to each of the submission when it is submitted, but I would just wait for all of them when they are there, because it's just a faster process to mark all of these submissions at the same time. Now, another thing is that assignment has also settings needed for assessment tasks. So it has the grade, it has the time when it's posted and the deadline for submission, the number of submissions. Of course, you can tag the assignment. It doesn't have the time limit, of course, but you can set the time limit depending on how you choose to have learners complete that assessment, if they're doing it in person or if they're doing it in the asynchronous part of their course. We'll talk about it later. And let me just show you an example of the of a few submission assignment tasks. So the first one is for CLB4 class. It comes from the unit called Talk About Your Neighborhood. And it's this writing a skill using task where the learner is required to describe their neighborhood. They have the CLB information in the description here. And then they have a brief description, what they need to write in their description, what needs to be included, and the checklist. So the checklist is basically a list of criteria that the instructor is going to use to assess, and the learner is going to self-assess them on. And we can take a look at this assessment task as a learner. I'm going to switch role to the student. And as you can see, the rubric appears in here. So the rubric in assignment is pretty straightforward to work with. It has it doesn't have a prescribed number of criteria. It's up to you how many criteria you use. So you can add to that list. In here, we have 5. And it has also different numbers in here, so you can set your own levels. In here, we have 3. You could have only 2 if this is something that you choose to do. The points are assigned automatically, so there's no other options. It's always 0, 1, 2, and then 3. And there's one more thing, there's no holistic criterion. So this is something that is not included. It's really very specific to PBLA processes. So I think this is something that you would need to resolve, on your own, and maybe include that in the feedback, or just look at the score and see whether you can consider that task as completed and achieving its main goal, communicative goal, right? So this is what it looks like. And then the learner would go add the submission, and then they would just, so you see this one, that's why the moment the learner clicks add submission, the rubric disappears for them. So that's why it's important to repeat the criteria here so they can go back and forth. And they can either drop the file here, or they can write an online text box here, and then save just changes and submit. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, and I'm going to show another assignment just to give you a sense of what it may look like at different levels. There is an assignment, there's an example of writing assessment task where the email is an email with a formal request is the main topic of that assessment. So it's quite similar to this in nature. There's also a speaking assignment, a speaking assessment task. So it's a very similar setup to the one that we have just seen. It's the grading criteria are listed in here. Then the brief description on how to access the voice, and how to access and make and submit the voice recording. And again, you can see the rubric, and then you would add submission. So it's very, very much similar to the previous task. It's just a different skill that is used in here. Okay, and I wanted to see one more that is here. I think that's quite different. I don't know why the video pops up so big. But anyway, so this is the task that again has a prompt. So that means it's based on so that the purpose of the task is actually for the learner to base their response on something that is already in the instructions. So in here, the learner would watch the video of somebody making a request, and then they would have to kind of make their own request based on the same kind of situation. So they need to decide what is appropriate or inappropriate in that video that they're watching, and then make their request that is appropriate. So, because that video is just an example of an inappropriate request. And again, we have grading criteria, we have the instructions on how to access, make, and submit the voice recording. And again, you see the rubric in here. Okay, so let me just go back to my original role. Okay, and go back to my to the presentation. Okay, and finally, the PDF files. PDF files are just tools that are provided for instructors to use as a resource. So the instructor can use the PDF file just if they decide to use the assessment task in face-to-face, in a face-to-face situation. So the instructor may choose to use an assessment task in a physical classroom, or they can do it during their web conferencing session. They would need to set up maybe breakout rooms and provide restrictions in terms of who is assessed and how the assessment is conducted and so on. So it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complex process, but it's this is just an additional resource. And if the instructor feels that they can develop their own task using any of the resources we have just gone through, they could do that as well. I say that because sometimes PDF files that are included are not only for the tasks that are already in the unit, but also for the tasks that are not there. And it really depends on the unit that you look at. So because the units were developed by different developers, different organizations, they vary from, and also depends on the level, CLB level, that is there. Some units are a little bit more concrete and specific to the task, and some units are a little bit more open-ended. So you will see the difference in that. Okay, so now if we were to develop our own task to assess productive skills, here are a few tips how you could go about it. So I think first of all, it's important to use your sandbox course. And I think it's important because sometimes you can have in your live course, you can have learners working on their tasks and their activities. And whenever you go into the editing mode, that may disrupt their work, and they may not view things the same way as they would originally without you interfering in there. You can, when you use your sandbox, you can preview different assessments in different units that are appropriate for for the CLB level that you teach. So I would just go to the course builder and take a look at a few different kinds of units and see how the assessment is designed, how it is set up, what things would work for the learners in your class, and what things you think would not work. Then the next step, when you know that, when you're familiar with them, just decide on the tool you want to use. You can draft the task if you're starting from scratch using Google Docs or Word file, and or you can use a ready-made task that is available. For example, the task from the Real World Task Bank on Tutela, and then develop the task online. And it's important to apply the principles of universal design for learning, just to make sure that your task is accessible to all learners, and it provides opportunities to present their skill in varied ways. And finally, test the task as a learner. So switch the role, similarly to what I was doing in your profile, just to see what the task looks like from the learner perspective, and modify the task as needed. Maybe improve it visually, maybe check the criteria, check the rubric, and so on. Okay, let's move on now to the specifics. So when you set up a speaking or writing assessment using a Moodle assignment, and I think that would be our primary choice for using the tool for the productive skill assessment, assignment is definitely a better choice. The things that you would need to take care of would be, first of all, providing all the information on CLB level, skill competency statement or competency area, the description of task procedures for the task with conditions and those restrictions, time limit, number of attempts, submissions, all of that, and specific instructions like read, preview, review your answers, submit, and so on. Then I would set up the rubric using assessment criteria, and you may just copy the assessment criteria from the tool that is already available to you if you're using the PDF files from Tutela, for example, or just set up the rubric the way you would have developed it in an editable file. And finally, edit the settings for all the additional elements like time limit, number of submissions, grade, type of feedback, type, task completion, and tags. And let's move on. And this is what we're going to do in here. So I'll just show an example how you could possibly do that with one of the tasks from the real world task bank that is on Tutela. So, okay, let's log in. So one of the tasks that I picked in here is for CLB4. This is the whole collection of real world tasks created by the Ottawa Catholic District School Board. It used to be on a separate website. They have been moved to Tutela. They've been vetted. So this is a good, reliable resource. And there are options of using the PDF or Word files. So if you would like to change some of the things in here, you can use their Word file, download it, and work within it, modify it, and adjust it so it fits the class that you teach. With all the additional information here, you can also, let me just go. You can also see the task is here, the scenario for the writing email, for writing an email to a classmate who's homesick from school. And then the criteria are listed in here. There's also the student self-check part that you can also include if you want to, but you cannot really include it in the assignment. It would have to be on a separate file, in a separate file. And in here we have just assessment activity tool that is for the instructor. This is what you would base your rubric on. You could, of course, there is a holistic criterion in here, and then there are 4 analytic criteria that you can use, and the 3-step scale, so you could use it just exactly the way it has been set up in the other assessments that I showed you. So that's just one example that you could use, and there are many like that in that collection. So this is exactly what I said. These are the steps: review, set up the description with all the important information, draft a rubric, and then edit the assignment so it works for the class that you teach. Now, another example that I wanted to show is setting up a speaking or writing assessment task using a Moodle quiz. So it will be a similar process. You will need to drive a description that would include all the information for the learner, and it means CLB related information, information related to the task performance, certain conditions that we're going to talk about, especially in terms of writing, and instructions for completing the task. You would set up questions with prompts and criteria. Make sure that the criteria are visible to the learner when they're doing the quiz. And then you could add criteria to greater information section, editing mode for easy access, so you can actually go in there. And when you go and mark the multiple submissions, it just goes faster. And edit the settings like you would do in any other assessment task. And we're going to take a look at an example in here, and that would be another example from the real world task bank. It's in here. So this is an example of the task that involves participation of 2 people in the task. And in here, it's a role play asking for help locating resources in a library. And in this role play, the learner, the assessed learner, makes a conversation with an instructor who's the support and plays a role of a librarian. So in here, in this task, we have 3 situations and then the criteria. What you would do using the quiz, you would probably need to set up, in here we have, let's say, 5 entries. You would probably need to set up 5 questions. In each question, you could include the prompt that would be whatever the librarian says. So the librarian would greet the learner, and then the learner, or in here, you need to get the librarian's attention. So you would need to insert the prompt in the question. I'll say, get librarian's attention. Librarian is busy working on a computer. And then the next question would be the resource that you want. And so the learner would need to know that they have to record the sentence in response to the prompt. Ideally, you could set it up with 1 question per page, so that it would be easier for the learner to actually follow the whole conversation and not be distracted by the previous or next questions. And all these criteria would need to be split into 1 criterion per question, plus the overall performance criteria, such as spoke loudly and clearly, made a polite request, and so on. So depending on the question that you would do, you would need to have maybe 2 or 3 criteria per question. This is something that is a little bit more complex, more difficult to create, but I think with some thinking and some planning, it could be done. And you may choose not to do that online. You may choose actually to have this task done by 2 learners, 1 learner playing a role of a librarian, the other learner being assessed. Just give them the role play cards that you would need to create, or just scenarios, and assess one of the learners in the breakout rooms. So that would be probably an easier way to do it, but it really depends. If you want to use it as a skill using task, this would be a good idea to set it up in the Moodle quiz. Okay, so that's exactly what we would do here. Let's move on to the next. Now, I think the part that is really difficult in terms of conducting assessment of productive skills online is when these tasks happen and how these tasks happen, how they're completed by the learner, and the whole settings and the situational context is really important. I think the most important thing that you would need to decide whether the tasks are going to be completed synchronously or asynchronously. So if you decide to have them done in a synchronous way, that means that you would need to dedicate the part of your web conferencing session to the assessment task. Set the time aside, go through all the process of demonstrating how to complete the task, explaining the procedures, explaining the criteria, and then giving the learners a time limit, which is actually very good for using the assignment in such a setting, because assignment does not have a time limit in its settings. And when you do it in a synchronous setting, you can actually set the time limit for the completion of the task. Now, if learners complete the task, if you decide to give learners the task to complete asynchronously, that would be probably the best done with high-level learners. So when the task really takes a long time to complete, or is a multi-step task, or is something that requires maybe a separate area where the learner is, and the learner doesn't need to be watched or seen or heard by others when completing the task, For example, recording their answers. This is what can be done asynchronously by learners, or a longer writing at CLB stage 2 levels, where they have to write longer texts, 3 paragraphs or an essay or something like that, or plan their presentation. However, if you do that, if you decide to administer tasks asynchronously, I think it's really important to have a conversation with learners about academic integrity, academic honesty, and self-directed learning. It's really important to make sure that all these topics are discussed. So, and there are many factors that will come in when you think about talking about those assessment tasks. So the first point is, do you require your learners to keep cameras off or on when they perform their tasks? And I know it's a difficult question. Sometimes learners keep their cameras off during their web conferencing sessions, and they may want to do that during their assessment task as well. And on the other hand, it may be an organizational policy. Maybe your service provider has decided that all learners need to have their cameras on while performing the assessment task. So this is something that needs to be communicated, sometimes can be negotiated as well. Can learners use spell check, or can they use dictionary? Is it allowed or not? So this is something you need to discuss again with learners, why they're not allowed to use dictionaries and why they should not check their spelling on a computer. And then finally, with longer speaking tasks, would you allow the learner to prepare for the task by writing out a script? So this is something, again, depending on the task, you may choose to have learners complete before the task. Maybe they would need a few minutes just to write down a few points that they're going to talk about, especially at higher levels when their speaking task involves a longer monologue. At lower levels, you would probably ask the learners not to write their sentences down before speaking them, before recording them, because you would like the learner to speak spontaneously without reading out the written text. So this is something that you may need to pay attention to and discuss with learners, and have the discussion, involve learners in that discussion, have them voice their concerns, and also express your concerns and say why these decisions are made. Now, it's really important for the learners to know how to complete the task online. It's the whole assessment task situation is stressful enough for some learners, so it would be really helpful for them to have this confidence in knowing what the procedure is, how to do it, how to navigate the page, and so on. And the good idea would be here to provide practice by using before the assessment task, by using skill using tasks, practice tasks that are set up in the same way that the assessment task would be set up. So using the same tool. And check understanding when you demonstrate or go over the procedures for the tasks. Elicit possible answers from the learners. For example, what do you do next? Where do you see the rubric? And so on and so on. So that just ensures, this way you can ensure that learners understand how to complete that task on their own. There are a few useful tutorials that you can demonstrate different things that would be necessary for the completion of the task. And I just put them in here, and these would include how to record and submit answers on Moodle quiz, how to post a voice recording on a forum, or how to type or record and submit your writing or speaking task on Moodle assignment. So all of that, you can find information and the list of videos and PDF files in the help that is available in the help block in your course. But also I'm going to list the links to those videos on the Avenue instructor forum when I post the recording of this webinar. I'll just add that information there. And when you administer speaking and writing tasks, it is important for lower level, for lower CLB levels, stage 1, to set up assessment tasks in face-to-face session, especially for speaking. I think it's a good practice for the learner to be able to complete the skill using task online. But when it comes to assessment and self-assessment tasks, it might be easier for the lower CLB levels to have them done either in a web conferencing session or in a face-to-face session in a classroom. Set up skill using tasks in the online course whenever possible, and review and demonstrate how to complete the task, and always be available for a support or technical troubleshooting during the assessment. Learners get stuck with quite obvious things such as recording, the microphone is not connected, something is not working. It's always a good idea to be available if you have the assessment done during the web conferencing session. And during or after the assessment, it's a good idea to monitor learner performance of the task if possible. You will see when the artifacts are auto-collected and what the scores are, so you can take a look at that with multiple learners and just have a sense of where everybody is. And once the task has been completed by the whole class, it is important that you review that task as a class and also individually, especially if the feedback requires the learner's attention and further explanation. And also look back at the tasks that you have used and just reflect on them, see what can be improved and what worked really well and how else it could be modified. Okay. The list of Avenue support files is in here. It's mostly in stage 2 and stage 3. So in stage 2, it's really all the files that are about using ePortfolio, managing forum, Poodle speaking assignments, and managing quizzes. And in stage 3, it would be the whole collection of files around assignment and around quiz. And again, I'm going to list these files, this link here, this list in the Avenue forum. And that's about it. It's the end of my presentation of my webinar. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, could you please raise your hand or just ask your question in a chat? That would be very helpful. Okay.
A great session, Margaret. Thank you. There weren't any questions in
Thanks.
the chat. There's a lot of discussion though, so I'll make sure I send you a copy of the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Feel free to unmute yourselves, everyone, if you'd like to say something.
Nope.
That's great. Very clear.
Okay.
It was easy to
Okay.
follow. Great session. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for participation. Yeah. And thank you, Paul, for your help. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, thanks. Okay.